So I started looking into the overall homicides in North Carolina beginning in '01 because that's when the public reporting began online in the database. I located an option to see the numbers and how they coincide with how the victim knew the perpetrator. There were columns for ex-husband, husband, boyfriend, friend, acquaintance, neighbor, employer, employee, family ties, friend of family, stranger. However, there was no option for ex-boyfriend, estranged husband, child in common, or that she had left the relationship. The largest overall yearly growth in a column was unknown, other known to the victim, acquaintance, or other family. Now, when I say unknown, I'm talking 700 and 800 in 2016. So either we have 700 or 800 unsolved murders in the state of North Carolina a year, or we are misstating facts, and we definitely are because I did a little bit more digging. Other known to the victim, 37. And that was the largest. These are the largest columns out of all of the listed columns. Acquaintance, 113. Other family, 26. The other columns are like the girlfriend and the girlfriend and the boyfriend and the ex-husband, way lower than these numbers. So, doesn't seem like it's any domestic violence, right? Okay, then. And so I did a little bit more digging. And I looked into obviously there's a hidden category happening. Because if we were to report, and also it appears as though there is a hidden category or misstated for daughters and sons. Because children are being murdered at an alarming rate when it comes to these domestic violence post-separation homicides that are being hidden in the state of North Carolina and capitalized upon in the following ways. So the North Carolina domestic violence, it's NCADDV, they show that how the victims actually knew their killers, but they stopped at a certain year, and it coincides with NCDPS's reporting of the victims. And I want anyone that's watching this to consider the weekly news stories that they are seeing of a woman and a child killed by the child's father. It's because she left. That's why. And when you look at the statistics versus the reports, you see that they're lies. So in the North Carolina, the NCADDV numbers, and I mentioned that before, how the victims knew their perpetrators for domestic violence homicides. Approximately 80% of these victims had left the perpetrator in a romantic relationship. So it was a post-separation relationship, and either their children were murdered and the perpetrator committed suicide, or the mother and the children were murdered. However, this is not being reported in the state reports. And just going through, seeing a couple of news stories. North Carolina, women killed by her ex with children in common or not. Fayetteville, Raleigh, Alexander County, Kingston County, another Raleigh, and that's just all in the past 3 years. So they aren't being reported because the statistics on the NCDPS site states that the lowest common factor between the perpetrators and these domestic violence homicides are the ones that have children in common. That's an absolute lie. And all you have to do is look at the news stories. So basically, the family court system are creating conflict. They're funding the court, funding the district attorney, funding DSS. They're making this huge profit. They're hiding child abuse. They're funding the NCDPS, making more of a profit. They're denying that domestic violence is happening within the confines of family court, where statistics, international and national statistics, show that when a woman leaves an abusive relationship, when she leaves an abuser, the incidence of domestic violence, in addition to child abuse, increase exponentially to where it's deadly, and the lethality level is, there's no way you can ignore it. In this case, we are, and I say we, the state of North Carolina, Forsyth County specifically, but I will say that there are a few more counties that I will be mentioning that are notable within the state of North Carolina, which is the only state I've really done any kind of statistical study on. By denying that domestic violence happens within the confines of custody court, family court, and not giving protective orders to these mothers and forcing them to co-parent with the man that abused her and that she barely escaped from, that she knows is abusing her child and is abusing the system when it comes to the entire process. If we are denying that this domestic violence happens, and like in the news story show, we're denying protective orders to women with custody orders, they're dying. And in the state of North Carolina, that has a very high percentage of domestic violence survivors that are dying, that are being murdered at the hands of her abuser post-separation, and her children are dying too. But the state of North Carolina is not reporting it. They're reporting, and by changing the title or the name of the relationship between the deceased victim and the perpetrator. They're getting funding for investigating, for prosecuting in the DA's office, for doing these things for these child victims. And I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars every single year in the state of North Carolina for victims, for legal assistance, for these child victims who have, barely survived as well. However, their abuse is not being substantiated specifically and intentionally when it would matter the most. When the mother, the survivor of domestic violence, has left the abuse with her child and tried to escape, she's able to be reeled back in by family court proceedings. And we have judges, guardian ad litems, directors like Iris Sunshine, judges like Judge Gordon Miller, GALs like Charlisa Powell, attorneys like Reginald Alston and Chris Beal, playing ball, being indifferent, not doing anything about it. Not only that, capitalizing upon it. Because if we continue to give these abused children and force these survivors of domestic violence to co-parent with an abuser that we know for a fact is dangerous and it could be deadly for her, we're continuing to push that narrative to profit off of it. And the fallout has already been shown. However, that's being concealed. The fallout of the domestic violence and the poor court practices of giving children to abusers and capitalizing upon the investigation and the infliction of paying child support, having to call and file CPS reports because your child's being abused, having to be forced to pay for legal representation, and there not being any integrity anyway, so it's not really mattering. This is being capitalized upon and hidden. The death rate, the amount of domestic violence victims who have finally gotten up enough courage and strength to leave her abuser with her children in tow. She's not able to survive. She doesn't get to stay a survivor, does she? And the acquaintance and the unknown boxes are the options of the North Carolina DPS statistics versus 2001's numbers in relation to the growth of the population and the rest of the United States statistics. This is a big deal. A really big deal. So we can create conflict, hide child abuse, like create conflict, $20 million, hide child abuse, $19 million, deny domestic violence, $100 million, deny domestic violence and a child abuse post-separation, priceless. Within child homicide, murder, suicide, and domestic violence killing, the theme is, if I can't have her, nobody will. Or, I'm just going to take the thing that she loves the most so she'll suffer for forever because I have access. I can. And this is a very important point as well. To substantiate, to prove the truth of something with facts instead of opinions. By removing the team, the procedure removes oversight and additional costs. Therefore, no facts are ever substantiated. A medical exam would obviously substantiate abuse, so they aren't doing any. A disclosure of sexual abuse by a child at a forensic interview would substantiate the abuse. So children are in the custody of abuser, and there are never any reports substantiated. By not acknowledging the risks to these women and these children that they're being forced to face, and instead exploiting and capitalizing these children and mothers, those in power and those that came up with this idea and have continued to commit fraud and engage in a conspiracy, a RICO conspiracy. They are guilty of a conspiracy to commit murder. They are guilty of a conspiracy to defraud the United States government and to obstruct justice and to obstruct humanity. Finding for DSS to investigate and to keep family together or profit off of removing children from domestic violence survivors. And this is the funding that DSS actually gets. They get money to investigate and to keep the family together, or profit off of removing the children from the domestic violence survivor who is doing everything she can to protect her children, to then investigate the survivor, more money, to omit crucial protocol, more money, to ignore all abuse, more money. Can't substantiate abuse, more money. Therefore, the family court can say all of the allegations are false by the safe mother because DSS says they're false. And the state law says that they have to be involved in abuse, neglect, and dependency, as well as law enforcement and the district attorney's office, and they're not either. Because remember, this is a high conflict custody battle. Don't forget that. These folks just can't get along. They can then appoint something like the Children's Law Center, the guardian ad litem, under a guise of abuse that will never be substantiated. But we're going to get the money for you saying it's abuse, or your children are actually being abused. We're going to get money for that. Even though these victims will never be safe from harm or free from abuse, and the things inflicted upon them during these proceedings and incidents will affect them for the rest of their entire life. By a child being in an abuser's care and preventing any real disclosures or substantiations, and also preventing oversight, and exploit the funding by denying the use of the GAL volunteer and the medical professional, the child medical exam. They can prevent any real disclosures of substantiations. And not only that, they can keep the reports down by putting all the reports into one file, because we know there's going to be many for these children. So they just hide them. So the numbers of the reports are the same, or going down, in the past 18 years, right? Even though the population is increasing. But the substantiations are bottom. By not protecting domestic violence survivors and their children post-separation via family court and refusing domestic violence protective orders, won hundreds of millions of dollars of funding meant to protect them, empower them, give them stability post-separation, getting financial assistance. Instead, is being put in the pockets of those in power. And we know the incidents of domestic violence and death multiply when she leaves. So in order to escape from her abuser, more often than not, this is the father of her children, and she's got to go to family court. If North Carolina is refusing to acknowledge the facts when it comes to survivors and victims, then concealing facts about domestic violence homicides, they're sending domestic violence survivors and their children to their death for profit. And they know it. I don't know who knows it. Somebody does. They're re-victimizing survivors, exploiting children. Judges like Gordo, honor a man's right over a child, over a survivor's life and that child's life and that child's innocence. I'm going to leave this at that because I think I've talked about enough today. I do have a lot more to speak about, and I'll get back with you all soon. And I pray that this gets things moving a little bit faster and in the right direction for everyone, because a good state auditor would know this. And when I called the state auditor last year about domestic violence in North Carolina, things did not improve in my life. And I'm seeing a multitude of reasons why my credibility and my life was attacked. But I'm so grateful to God I'm still here and able to share this message with all of y'all. Have a good one.